The afternoon sun was soft that day, falling through the large windows of St. Mary's Hospital. The air smelled of disinfectant, and everything was quiet except for the beeping of machines. Doctors and nurses moved quickly through the hallways, their voices low and tired. For most people, it was just another day. But that day was about to become something no one in that hospital would ever forget. Outside, a German shepherd was walking along the parking lot, his fur dusty, his eyes sharp and searching. He had no collar, no owner in sight. He looked tired but determined, as if he had a purpose. The security guard at the gate didn't notice him slip through the opening when a car entered. The dog moved fast, his nose twitching, his ears alert. Somehow, he seemed to know exactly where he was going, inside the hospital. A nurse named Claire was pushing a medicine cart when she saw something strange. A big brown and black dog was running down the hall. For a second, she froze, thinking it must be someone's pet that got lost. Then she realized this was a German shepherd, and no one was holding its leash. "Hey, stop that dog!" she called, but the animal didn't stop. It dashed past her, nails clicking against the white floor, tail raised high. Patients peeked out of their doors in surprise. A little boy on crutches laughed and pointed. "Look, a dog in the hospital." The nurses were not laughing. They rushed after the animal, shouting, "Catch him before he reaches the ward!" But the dog kept running, turning left, then right, nose down. Sniffing the air like he was following a trail, he stopped outside a room marked 309. The sign on the door read, "Emily Carter, Critical Care." Inside, a small girl lay still on a hospital bed. Her skin was pale, her head wrapped with a thin bandage, and wires connected her to machines that beeped softly. She had been in a coma for 3 months after a car accident. Her mother, Sarah, had just stepped out to get coffee from the vending machine down the hall. The German shepherd pushed his nose against the door. Wind once, then pushed harder. The door creaked open. A nurse tried to stop him, but he was fast. He slipped inside and jumped onto the side of the bed. For a moment, everyone froze. The dog didn't bark, didn't move wildly. He just looked at the girl, then slowly laid down beside her bed, resting his head near her hand. When Sarah returned, she found nurses standing at the door, unsure what to do. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. One of the nurses explained that a strange dog had entered the ward and was now beside her daughter. Sarah's heart pounded. She looked into the room and saw the animal lying there, calm and quiet. His eyes were fixed on Emily. He wasn't aggressive. He looked sad, protective. "Please don't remove him yet," Sarah said softly. Maybe he feels something." The nurses exchanged confused looks, but they nodded. They called Dr. Ryan, the neurologist, to handle the situation. When he arrived, he frowned. "We can't have an animal in ICU," he said firmly. "It's not safe." But as he spoke, the dog slowly reached out his paw, touching Emily's blanket, and let out a low whine that sounded almost like a cry. Something about that small gesture silenced everyone. Sarah stepped closer and saw the dog's eyes filled with emotion, as if he knew the girl. "He's not hurting anyone," she whispered. "Let him stay a little." The doctor hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but something about the moment felt different, almost sacred. Finally, he said, "All right. But just for a few minutes." The nurses brought in a bowl of water and placed it near the bed. The dog didn't move. He didn't drink or bark. He just stayed close, breathing softly beside Emily. The monitor beeped steadily, matching the quiet rhythm of the girl's fragile heart. Sarah sat in a chair watching them. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange kind of peace. Hours passed. The dog never left the room. When the cleaning staff came in, he growled softly until they finished and left. When Sarah tried to adjust the blanket, he watched carefully, making sure she meant no harm. The nurses started calling him the guard. By evening, word had spread around the hospital. Staff from other floors came by to peek into room 309. "That's the dog who got in." One janitor whispered, "He looks like he's guarding her." Another nurse said, "It's like he's waiting for her to wake up." Everyone wondered where he came from. Security checked the cameras and saw him entering right after an ambulance arrived. It was almost like he followed the sound of that siren, or maybe he'd been waiting nearby for days. When night fell, the hospital grew quiet again. Sarah stayed by Emily's side, her hand gently touching her daughter's fingers. The German shepherd stayed on the floor beside them, head resting on his paws. Every now and then, he looked at Emily and let out a low sigh, as if he remembered something. At one point, Sarah whispered, "You miss someone too, don't you?" The dog's ears twitched, and he looked at her as if he understood. A tear rolled down her cheek. She hadn't cried in days. But now, watching this silent creature lying so faithfully beside her daughter, she couldn't hold back. Late that night, when the hospital lights dimmed and only the machines hummed, Sarah dozed off in her chair. The dog lifted his head and looked at Emily again. He leaned forward, his warm nose brushing against her cold hand. For the briefest moment, one of Emily's fingers twitched. The movement was so small, it could have been missed. But the dog saw it. His ears perked up, and he let out a soft whine, pressing closer. He didn't know that the girl had been sleeping for months, trapped in silence. He didn't know the pain her mother carried every single day. All he knew was that he had found her and he wasn't leaving again. When morning came, the nurses found him still there, awake, watching over Emily. He hadn't eaten or moved all night. One nurse smiled softly and said, "He's more loyal than most people." Dr. Ryan entered again, expecting to send the animal away, but something stopped him. The girl's heart rate had become slightly steadier. He stared at the monitor, then at the dog lying peacefully on the floor. "Strange," he murmured. "Coincidence, maybe?" But deep inside, he wasn't sure. Sarah stood beside him, her voice quiet but firm. "Please, let him stay. Just one more day." The doctor hesitated again, then nodded slowly. "All right, one more day." That was how it began, a stray German shepherd who had somehow entered a hospital and found the one girl he wouldn't leave. No one knew who owned him, where he came from, or how he got inside. But from that day forward, the hospital staff began to notice something different, not just in the girl's room, but in the air around it. Room 309 didn't feel cold anymore. Nurses stopped by to smile. Doctors lowered their voices. And even visitors walking past felt something gentle, a quiet warmth, as if love itself had found its way in. And though no one yet knew his name, the mysterious German shepherd had already changed everything. He was no longer a stray dog that entered by accident. He had become a silent guardian, and his watch had only just begun. The next morning started quietly in St. Mary's Hospital. The halls were filled with the faint smell of coffee and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes. Outside room 309, a group of curious staff members stood talking in low voices. The story of the German shepherd who had wandered into the hospital had already spread across every floor. Some called him brave, others called him lucky. But everyone wanted to know one thing. Why did he come here? And why did he choose Emily's room out of hundreds? Inside the room, Sarah sat beside her daughter, brushing Emily's hair gently. The dog was lying near the bed, awake but calm, his brown eyes watching every movement. When Sarah dropped a tissue, he lifted his head, alert, as if ready to protect her child from anything that might harm her. She smiled faintly. "You're a good boy," she whispered. "I wish I knew your name." A nurse named Claire entered, carrying a small bowl of food. "The cafeteria staff cooked something soft for him," she said. "Boiled chicken and rice." Sarah thanked her, but the dog didn't move toward the bowl. He only sniffed it once, then turned his eyes back to Emily. "He won't eat," Claire said softly. "He hasn't eaten since he came," Sarah sighed. "He's waiting for her. Maybe he won't eat until she wakes up." Claire looked at the dog with sympathy. "That's crazy, but it feels true." Dr. Ryan entered a few minutes later holding a clipboard. He had spent the night reading Emily's file again. She had been in a deep coma since the accident, her brain activity stable but minimal. The doctors had done everything they could. Now it was only time and hope. He looked at the animal lying there and frowned thoughtfully. "We need to find out where this dog came from," he said. "He's not just some random stray." The hospital security team was already on it. They checked the camera recordings again. The footage showed the German Shepherd entering the parking lot around noon, right after an ambulance arrived. He waited outside for almost 10 minutes, then slipped in through a half-open emergency door. After that, he walked straight to the elevator as if he knew exactly which floor to go to. No hesitation, no confusion. That was what shocked everyone most. Dogs can smell people they know from miles away. One of the guards said during the meeting, "Maybe he knows the girl." Dr. Ryan didn't dismiss the idea completely. He returned to the room later and watched as the dog gently licked Emily's hand. Her fingers twitched slightly again, so small that only Sarah noticed. She gasped softly, covering her mouth. "Did you see that?" The doctor nodded slowly. "Could be a muscle reflex," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. Inside, something told him it was more than that. By afternoon, several patients and visitors had heard the story and started stopping by. They would peek in quietly, not wanting to disturb the girl or the dog. Some brought small treats, some whispered prayers. A young nurse took a picture from the door and shared it on social media with the caption, "Guardian Angel Dog in Room 309. Within hours, the picture spread across town. People online started asking questions. Wanting to know more about the mysterious animal who refused to leave the girl's side, the hospital administration grew concerned about the sudden attention. But Sarah begged them not to remove the dog. "Please," she said tearfully to the head nurse. "He's the first good thing that's happened in months. Just let him stay a bit longer." The head nurse looked at Sarah's tired eyes and nodded. "All right," she said. "But if he causes any trouble, we'll have to call animal control." Sarah promised to keep him calm. She didn't have to try hard. The German Shepherd never barked, never made a mess, never acted wild. He just stayed beside Emily, resting his head on the edge of her bed, or sitting quietly by the window. Sometimes he would lift his nose, sniffing the air when doctors came in, as if judging if they meant any harm. His quiet loyalty touched everyone who saw him. That evening, the hospital janitor, an old man named Carl, stopped by with a kind smile. "I used to have a dog like that," he said. "Name was Max. Smartest dog I ever knew. Saved my grandson once." Sarah smiled faintly at the name. "Max," she repeated softly. The dog's ears perked up. He looked at her tail, wagging slightly for the first time. Sarah's eyes widened. "Max," she whispered again. The dog stood up and walked toward her slowly, tail moving in gentle excitement. Tears filled her eyes. "Is that your name?" she asked. The dog whined softly and nudged her hand with his nose. For the first time, Sarah laughed through her tears. "Max. Your name is Max." The nurse watching from the door gasped. He answered, "You." Words spread quickly. The dog had a name now. Everyone started calling him Max. The doctors joked that Max was now part of the hospital team. Someone even made a small name tag and attached it to a piece of cloth, tying it around his neck. Over the next few days, something began to change in Emily's room. The heart monitor showed slight variations. Her breathing became steadier. It wasn't enough to call a recovery, but it was enough to bring hope. Whenever Max placed his head near her hand, the readings improved slightly. Nurses noticed it. Dr. Ryan noticed it. He wrote it in his report but didn't share it publicly. He didn't want to sound foolish, yet he couldn't ignore it either. One afternoon, Sarah dozed off in the chair again. She dreamed of the accident, the screeching tires, the shattered glass, the moment everything went dark. When she woke, her hands were trembling. Max was still there, lying close, eyes half open. She reached down and touched his fur. "You were there too, weren't you?" she whispered. He looked up, eyes soft and understanding. She felt warmth spread through her chest. "You found her," she said. "You never gave up." The days continued to pass, and the bond between Max and the girls seemed to deepen. Nurses would sometimes see him press his nose gently to Emily's hand, as if reminding her he was there. Some nights, when the rain hit the windows, Max would whine softly, a sound that broke everyone's hearts. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was family now. The hospital began receiving letters and small gifts from people who heard about the story online. Some sent blankets, others sent dog treats or flowers. One message read, "Faith isn't always found in churches. Sometimes it walks in on four paws." But behind all the smiles, a quiet mystery still remained. How did Max know where to go? How did he find Emily? Sarah couldn't stop wondering. The timing, the way he entered, how he acted, it all felt too perfect. One night, she asked Dr. Ryan directly, "Do you believe dogs can sense love? Even across distance?" The doctor gave a small smile. "Science doesn't have a word for it," he said, "but maybe some bonds are beyond science." Sarah looked at her daughter, pale but peaceful, and at the loyal German shepherd sleeping beside her bed. "Then maybe he's here for a reason," she said. The next morning, something happened that caught everyone's attention. As the nurses prepared for rounds, they noticed Max standing up suddenly, tail stiff, ears sharp. He walked to the foot of the bed and looked at Emily. Then, without warning, he lifted his head and gave a short bark. The first sound he had made in days. Everyone rushed to the room, thinking something was wrong. But when they looked at the monitor, the heart rate had risen slightly again. Sarah covered her mouth in shock. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows she's still fighting." The staff stood silently, feeling something powerful they couldn't explain. The dog lay back down again, resting quietly, as if his job for the moment was done that night. As Sarah wrote in her diary, she looked at Max, curled up beside Emily's bed. The soft rhythm of machines filled the air. "You're not just a stray," she whispered. "You're her protector, her angel." Outside, the hospital lights glowed softly in the dark, but inside room 309, it felt warm and alive again. Max, the loyal German shepherd who appeared from nowhere, had brought something no medicine could provide: hope. And though no one yet knew how the story would end, one thing was already certain. He had come into that room for a reason, and he wasn't leaving until that reason was fulfilled. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the German shepherd spread beyond the hospital walls. Reporters came asking questions, but the hospital didn't allow cameras inside. They said it was for the girl's privacy. Still, everyone knew about the loyal dog who stayed beside the comatose girl and wouldn't leave. People began sending letters and drawings of dogs and angels. Children sent handmade cards that said, "Wake up soon, Emily, and we love Max the hero." Inside room 3909, time moved differently. The machines beeped softly. The curtains swayed with the wind from the air vent. And the same quiet presence filled the space. Max lying close to Emily's bed, always watching her. He never slept deeply. Even when his eyes were closed, his ears twitched at the slightest sound. One morning, Nurse Claire entered to check the vitals and found Max standing up, staring at the window. "Good morning, Max," she said kindly. He wagged his tail once, then looked back at the girl, as if waiting for her to wake up. Sarah, sitting beside the bed, smiled weakly. "He waits every morning like this," she said softly. "Like he believes today will be the day." Claire nodded. "Maybe he knows something we don't." Dr. Ryan walked in soon after, carrying a cup of coffee and a tired expression. "Good morning," he said. He checked Emily's chart, looked at the monitor, then sighed. "No major changes, but she's stable." Sarah didn't say anything. She only looked at her daughter's face and brushed a lock of hair away from her forehead. Max lay down again, resting his head on his paws, his eyes never leaving Emily's hand. That afternoon, something strange happened. A volunteer from Animal Services came to the hospital to help identify the dog. She carried a scanner to check for a microchip. "It'll be quick," she said gently. Kneeling beside Max, when she brought the scanner close to his neck, Max didn't resist. The device beeped. "He has a chip," the woman said, surprised. "Let's see what it says." The small screen showed a number, followed by a name, Max Carter. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Carter, that's our name." The woman looked up in confusion. "You mean?" Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "He's our dog. He went missing the night of the accident." The nurse gasped softly, her hand over her mouth. "You mean he found her? After all this time?" Sarah nodded again. Her voice shook. "We thought he died that night. He ran off when the car crashed. We searched everywhere. But he found her." He really found her. The room went silent except for the faint hum of machines. Dr. Ryan looked stunned. So he's been missing for months and somehow came here? How did he even find her? Sarah looked at Max, who now sat beside the bed, his eyes full of warmth and loyalty. He just knew, she whispered. He followed his heart. The doctor didn't reply. For once, science had no explanation. That night, Sarah sat quietly, holding her daughter's hand while Max lay at their feet. The air felt different, not as heavy, not as hopeless. She whispered softly, "You're home now, Max." You brought her hope. Later that evening, the hospital janitor, old Carl, entered to mop the floors. He smiled at Max. "You're famous now, buddy," he said kindly. "The whole town's talking about you." Max wagged his tail slightly, but didn't move from his spot. "You know," Carl continued, leaning on his mop, "dogs like him don't just act on luck. They feel things, real things. My wife used to say, animals can see love." Sarah smiled at the old man. "I believe that now." As the night grew darker, Max stood up suddenly. His ears pricked, and he began pacing near the bed. Sarah frowned. "What's wrong, Max?" The dog whined softly and nudged Emily's arm. The heart monitor began to beep faster. Startled, Sarah stood up and pressed the nurse call button. "Something's happening," she cried. Claire rushed in within seconds. Followed by Dr. Ryan, they checked the readings. Emily's heart rate had increased slightly, and her brain activity showed new movement. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd seen in weeks. Max barked once, tail wagging hard. Everyone in the room froze, their hearts racing. "She's responding," the nurse whispered. "It's small, but it's there." Dr. Ryan stared at the monitor, shaking his head slowly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He turned to Sarah. "She's reacting to something. Maybe his voice. Maybe the presence." Sarah sank into the chair, tears running down her face. "Max, you're waking her, aren't you?" she whispered. The dog licked Emily's hand again, whining softly. Over the next few days, the same thing happened again and again. Whenever Max touched Emily's hand or barked softly, her vitals would change slightly. It became impossible to deny that something was happening between them, some deep, invisible bond. Doctors started visiting more often, curious and amazed. One even suggested recording the readings to study the reaction. "We might be seeing a rare emotional trigger," he said, "something connected to memory or scent." But for Sarah, it wasn't science. It was love. Max became a permanent part of room 39. The nurses brought him meals. The janitors cleaned around him carefully, and visitors would often stop by just to smile at him. The hospital administration allowed him to stay officially, calling him a therapy companion. They even gave him a small badge with his name on it. Therapy Dog, Max Carter. As days passed, Emily's improvements became more visible. Her fingers began to twitch more often. Once, she even squeezed her mother's hand faintly, making Sarah cry out in joy. Max jumped up, barking excitedly, as if he understood the meaning of that small movement. Every night, before sleeping, Sarah would whisper stories about home, about their backyard, the park, and the day they brought Max home as a tiny puppy. Max would listen, ears twitching, eyes soft and full of memory. One afternoon, a small crowd gathered near the room. The hospital had organized a small celebration, not for recovery, but for hope. The nurses hung a paper sign that said, "Miracles still happen." Sarah stood near the window, holding Max's collar gently. "You're the reason for that sign," she told him softly. "You gave us faith again." Outside, the sky was cloudy, but sunlight slipped through, casting a warm glow across Emily's face. For a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw her daughter's lips move, almost like a faint smile. She froze, staring, heart pounding. "Emily," she whispered, trembling. The doctors rushed in again, checking her pulse and eyes. There was no full awakening yet, but something deep inside her had changed. Dr. Ryan smiled faintly. "She's fighting harder now. I can feel it." That evening, Sarah took Max for a small walk around the hospital garden. He walked proudly beside her, tail wagging slowly. "You knew she was here all along," she said softly. "You never gave up on her, even when we did." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with quiet strength, and she felt comfort just seeing him. When they returned to the room, Max immediately went back to his spot near Emily's bed. He curled up tightly, resting his head against her arm. Sarah sat watching them, her heart full of gratitude and hope. In the dim light of the room, she whispered, "Maybe love really is the best medicine." The machines kept beeping softly, marking time, but now every sound felt alive with promise. Max stayed perfectly still, breathing in rhythm with the girl he refused to leave. And though no one said it aloud, everyone in that hospital began to believe something extraordinary was happening in room 309. Something no doctor could ever explain, but every heart could feel. The night was darker than usual, clouds covering the moon and rain tapping against the tall windows of St. Mary's Hospital. The hallways were quieter than ever. Only the soft hum of machines and the occasional sound of footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. Inside room 309, the dim bedside lamp cast a soft golden glow over Emily's pale face. Her mother sat beside her, eyes half closed, whispering a prayer under her breath. On the floor near the bed, Max lay awake, his ears twitching at every sound. He hadn't left that room in weeks. Nurses had tried to take him out for breaks, but he always returned quickly, worried to leave Emily's side even for a moment. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The power flickered for a second, making the monitors blink. Sarah jumped slightly, looking around in fear, but everything returned to normal. Max raised his head, looking at the window, then turned his eyes back to Emily, who lay motionless under her blanket. He let out a low, uneasy whine, as if sensing something was about to happen. Nurse Claire came in for her late-night round. "Hey, Max," she said softly, smiling at the loyal dog. "Still guarding your girl, huh?" She adjusted the 4-line, checked the monitor, then smiled at Sarah. Her heartbeat is steady. "That's a good sign." Sarah nodded tiredly. "He hasn't moved all night," she whispered, looking at Max. "It's like he knows she needs him right now." Claire reached down to pat Max gently. "He's one of a kind." Then she left quietly, closing the door behind her. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass. The air felt thick, filled with the sound of thunder and the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Max stood up suddenly. His fur bristled slightly, his ears straightened, and he gave a soft but firm bark, not loud, but filled with urgency. Sarah looked at him, alarmed. "What is it, Max?" she asked. He barked again, moving closer to Emily's bed. He nudged her hand with his nose, whining softly, pacing back and forth. The monitors began to change. The lines on the screen flickered. The beeps became faster. Sarah's heart started to race. "Claire," she shouted, pressing the nurse button. "Something's happening." Within seconds, Claire ran back into the room, followed by Dr. Ryan and another nurse. They surrounded the bed, checking the machines and Emily's pulse. The heart monitor was showing rapid changes, activity that hadn't been seen in months. "She's responding," Dr. Ryan exclaimed. "Increase observation, this could be it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she leaned closer to her daughter. "Emily, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her voice shook as she spoke. Max stood on his hind legs, paws resting on the bed, his face close to Emily's. He whined again, licking her fingers gently. Then it happened, the smallest, most beautiful miracle. Emily's hand twitched, her fingers moving weakly around Max's fur. The dog froze, staring at her hand, then let out a short bark that echoed through the room. The nurses gasped. She moved. One shouted. Sarah covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my God, she's moving," she cried. "Emily, it's Mom. I'm here." Dr. Ryan looked at the monitors, unable to believe what he was seeing. "She's coming out of the coma," he said softly. "This is real." Max wagged his tail furiously, jumping down and back up again, as if urging Emily to open her eyes. The entire room filled with the sound of beeping, movement, and quiet sobs. Sarah leaned over and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Come back to me, baby. We're waiting for you." Minutes passed like hours. Emily's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, Painfully, they began to open. Her pupils moved, trying to adjust to the light. The doctor shone a small flashlight to check her response, and his face broke into a wide, disbelieving smile. "She's awake," he whispered. Sarah sobbed openly now, holding her daughter's hand tightly. "Emily, oh sweetheart, you're awake," she cried. The little girl's lips trembled. Her voice was weak and dry, but the words she spoke made everyone freeze. "Max," the nurses gasped. Sarah looked at the dog, then back at her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart. Max is here," she said tearfully. "He's been waiting for you this whole time," Max barked softly, tail wagging, his eyes shining with emotion. He rested his head beside Emily's arm, pressing against her gently. Emily's small fingers tried to move again. Brushing through his fur, the sight was enough to bring tears to every eye in the room. Dr. Ryan turned away for a moment, pretending to write something on his clipboard just to hide the emotion on his face. "This is beyond medical explanation," he said quietly to Claire. "I've never seen anything like it." Word spread quickly through the hospital. The girl in room 309 woke up. People from every floor rushed to see her. Patients smiled from their beds, nurses hugged each other, and even the usually stern security guard grinned. It felt like a wave of happiness had swept through the whole building, but no one forgot who had started it. The story wasn't just about a miracle recovery. It was about the dog who refused to give up. Later that night, when the excitement calmed and Emily was moved to a recovery ward, Sarah sat by her bedside, holding her hand. "You did it," she whispered, smiling through tears. "You came back." Max lay on the floor, eyes half closed, finally resting after weeks of sleepless nights. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if even he knew his mission was finally complete. Dr. Ryan visited again before leaving for home. "She's responding well," he said kindly. "We'll run more tests tomorrow, but I think she'll recover completely." He paused and looked at Max. "He deserves a medal," he said softly. "That dog saved her." Oh. Sarah smiled. "He's family," she said simply. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the room for the first time in weeks. The air felt different, lighter, warmer. Emily was awake, her voice still weak, but stronger than before. She asked for her mother, and then for Max. When the dog stood up and walked over to her, she smiled for the first time since the accident. "You found me," she whispered, her small hand reaching out to touch his fur. Max wagged his tail and leaned his head on her lap, letting out a soft sigh. Sarah couldn't stop crying as she watched them. The bond between them was something words couldn't describe. Later, when a reporter came to write about the story, Sarah agreed, but only on one condition. "You tell them this isn't about luck," she said. "It's about love." Max didn't just find her, he saved her. The newspaper printed the story 2 days later with the headline, "Loyal dog brings girl back from coma, hospital staff call it a miracle." People all over the city talked about it. Strangers sent flowers, gifts, and messages of love. Children wrote cards calling Max a hero. Inside the hospital, life continued as usual, but room 309 became special. Nurses would smile every time they passed it, remembering the night of the miracle. Emily continued to get better each day. She could talk, eat, and even laugh again. Max never left her side, not even for a second. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would sit quietly by the window, watching the stars. Max would lie near her feet, and she would whisper, "You brought her back to me, boy. I'll never forget that." He would lift his head slightly, look at her with those warm brown eyes, and wag his tail softly as if he understood. Everyone in the hospital believed something magical had happened that night. But for Sarah and Emily, it wasn't magic. It was the power of a bond, stronger than words. The bond of love, loyalty, and faith. From that day on, the hospital staff called Max the guardian of room 309, and every person who heard his story learned one simple truth. Sometimes miracles don't come from machines or medicine. Sometimes they walk in quietly on 4 paws and refuse to leave until the one they love opens their eyes again. The morning sun shone gently through the wide windows of St. Mary's Hospital, filling room 309 with a soft golden light. The room that had once been filled with quiet tears and the steady beep of machines now carried the sound of laughter. Emily sat up in her bed, her hair brushed neatly, a warm blanket covering her legs. Her face looked brighter, her eyes full of life again. Beside her, Max sat proudly, his tail thumping against the floor every time she smiled. It had been 2 weeks since she woke from her coma, and each day felt like a new beginning. Sarah could barely stop smiling. Every time she saw her daughter talk, move, or giggle softly, her heart overflowed with gratitude. "You're getting stronger every day, sweetheart," she said, as she adjusted the pillow behind Emily's back. "Soon, you'll be running again." Emily nodded, her small hand reaching out to pet Max's head. "Because Max stayed with me," she said softly. "He didn't let me stay asleep." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were full of warmth. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He never left you. Not even for a minute." Dr. Ryan entered the room with his usual calm smile. He had been visiting every morning since the miracle. "How are my 2 favorite patients?" he asked jokingly. Emily giggled. "I'm good, and Max is hungry." The doctor chuckled. "Then that means he's healthy too." He checked Emily's charts, listened to her heartbeat, and nodded in satisfaction. "You're doing wonderfully. Another week, and you might be able to go home." Sarah gasped softly, covering her mouth. "Really?" Dr. Ryan smiled kindly. "Yes. Her body is healing faster than we expected. I'd call it luck, but something tells me it's more than that." He looked at Max and added softly, "Maybe love really can heal." After he left, nurses came in bringing flowers and cards. The hospital had been receiving gifts ever since the story became known. The media called it the miracle of room 309. People from across the country sent messages of love and hope. A local school even sent a hand-painted banner that read, "We love you, Emily and Max." The nurses hung it near the door, and every visitor who entered smiled when they saw it. As Emily recovered, she began spending short times outside her room. With help from a wheelchair, Sarah pushed her to the hospital garden every morning. Max walked beside them, proudly wearing his little therapy badge. People would stop to greet him, children would wave, "K," and nurses would slip him small treats. One morning in the garden, Emily closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sun. "It smells like home," she whispered. Sarah smiled, running a hand through her daughter's hair. "Soon, we'll be home again. Max will have his old bed back, and you'll have your toys." Emily giggled. "And I'll share my blanket with him. He saved me." Sarah nodded softly, her heart swelling. Yes, he did. A few days later, the hospital decided to organize something special. It's a small event in the courtyard to celebrate Emily's recovery and Max's loyalty. Staff and patients gathered, clapping and smiling as Sarah wheeled Emily forward, with Max walking proudly at her side. The head nurse gave a short speech, her voice filled with emotion. "In all my years of nursing," she said, "I have never seen such love and devotion. This dog reminded us all what hope looks like." She looked down at Max and added, "You brought light to this hospital, boy. You showed us that love can be stronger than anything." Everyone clapped as Max wagged his tail happily. Emily laughed and held up a small medal that the hospital had made, a shiny gold circle that said Hero Dog Max Carter. She leaned forward and tied it around his neck with a red ribbon. "You're our hero," she said proudly. The crowd cheered, and several nurses wiped their eyes. Even Dr. Ryan clapped quietly, smiling with genuine happiness. Cameras flashed as a few pictures were taken for the hospital's wall of heroes. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Thank you, God, for sending him back to us." After the event, Emily's room became quiet again. She lay resting in bed while Sarah read to her. Max curled up at the foot of the bed, breathing softly. The gentle rhythm of their breathing and the calm of the hospital night filled the air with peace. Days passed quickly, and soon the day came when Emily was finally discharged. Nurses gathered around to say goodbye. "We'll miss you, sweetheart," Claire said warmly. "You gave this place so much hope." Emily smiled shyly. "I'll come visit." Sarah hugged each nurse, tears in her eyes. "Thank you all for believing in her and for letting Max stay." When they walked through the hospital doors, the air outside felt fresh and alive. The sky was bright blue, and the wind carried the scent of flowers from the nearby park. Max barked happily, running in small circles before returning to Emily's wheelchair. "He knows we're going home," Sarah said with a laugh. The drive home was emotional. The car passed familiar streets, places Sarah had avoided for months because they reminded her of the accident. But now, those memories no longer felt painful. They felt like proof of how far they had come. When they reached home, Max jumped out first, running to the gate and barking joyfully. Everything looked the same: the small garden, the old swing, the white fence. Emily smiled so wide that Sarah thought her heart would burst. "We're home, Max," she said softly. "Inside." Max ran straight to the living room, sniffing everything like he was making sure it was still safe. He found his old bed by the fireplace, covered in dust. Sarah cleaned it quickly and placed a new blanket there. Max circled twice and lay down with a happy sigh. Emily laughed, clapping her hands. "See, he remembers everything." That night, they sat together in the living room. Sarah made warm soup, and Emily told small stories about her dreams while she was asleep. "I saw a light," she said quietly. "It was far away, but Max was there. He kept barking and pulling me closer until I woke up." Sarah listened, her eyes wet. "He brought you back, sweetheart." Emily nodded, smiling. "Because he loves us." Max lay on the rug, his eyes half closed, tail moving gently as if he understood every word. The sound of the crackling fire filled the room. For the first time in months, peace truly returned to their home. Over the following weeks, Emily grew stronger. She could walk again with help, and her laughter filled the house. Max followed her everywhere, from the garden to the kitchen to her room at night. If she dropped her toy, he brought it. If she tripped, he stayed by her side until she stood again. The bond between them became unbreakable. Sarah often watched them together and whispered to herself, he was never just a dog. He was her guardian. Months later, they returned to the hospital to visit. Room 309 had been repainted and turned into a new therapy room for children. On the wall was a framed photo, Emily holding Max, both smiling brightly. Under it were the words, "Love heals," inspired by Max, the guardian of Room 39. As Emily stood in front of the picture, she smiled proudly. "That's us," she said. Sarah nodded, holding her daughter close. "Yes, sweetheart. That's you and your hero." Max wagged his tail, letting out a happy bark that echoed through the hallway. Nurses turned to look and smiled, recognizing the sound. It was the same bark that had once called them into the room, the bark that had started a miracle as they left the hospital. As the sunlight fell softly across the path, Emily looked up at her mother and said, "Mom, I think miracles are real." Sarah smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. And sometimes, miracles have 4 legs and a wagging tail." Max walked proudly between them, his head held high, as if he knew exactly what he had done. He had brought life back where there was none, hope where there was despair, and love where fear once lived. The world had called him a hero, but to Emily and Sarah, he was simply family, the heartbeat that had led them home. And so, the story that began with a lost dog finding his way into a hospital room ended with a little girl's laughter, filling the air once more, and a loyal German shepherd lying peacefully beside her, the guardian who never gave up until his girl came back.